Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time zone. Welcome in Salesforce Epics Hour. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the Epics Hour and your host. And today we have a great session, Choose Your Own Adventures. And we have a great speaker, Carl, with us. Let me hand over to him for his introduction and the presentation. Hand over to you, Carl.
Thanks, Amit. So for those that don't know me, my name is Carl Brundage. I am a master architect at Otisava, also a CTA MVP. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through a scenario, but a scenario where I need your help. I'm not going to be able to solve this on my own. I'm going to need your input in the chat where you can pick between different options, and we're going to see what type of solution we can come up with. So what this is based off of, if you have ever been familiar with the Choose Your Own Adventure books? This is something as a kid that I really liked to read. And what would happen is you would be reading this book, and then after a few pages at the end of a page, you had some options. And you were, if you decided you wanted to use option A, you'd go to this page, and option B, you go to a different page. And if you picked wisely, you would keep going on your adventure. But if you made not so great choices, sometimes that would lead to ruin, and you'd have to go back and try again. So for today, I'm going to give you a scenario and the choice of what we do next. So if I were to give you an example, I found some books in my house. This was a Mario Choose Your Own Adventure. And you can see at the end, if you think they should make a straight dash to the nearest exit, turn to page 20. If you think they should follow King Troopa's route, turn to page 55. So we went to page 20. Oh no, something bad happened, game over. So it's going to be just like that, except with a real life scenario. So what are we going to ground ourselves in? Well, like any architect adventure, we're going to look at something that came from real life. And what I have is a transportation company that the names, the information, the industry, everything's been changed to make it fictitious, but this was a real challenge that a company faced. So in this organization, we have a global company, and they're really looking to modernize support. They want to be able to move from emails and spreadsheets and really disjointed support processes to having something that really improves the customer experience. From the types of companies they're supporting, they're focused on business accounts. So this is a B2B company, not one that's going to consumers. And there's a lot of service users, 10,000 of them, and they're really across the world. They're in Americas, Europe, Asia Pacific. So this company is running all the time. While they have a lot of experience with custom development, they've built a lot of things on their own, they're relatively new to Salesforce, don't have a lot of experience with the platform. So if we think about that, I'm going to give you the first place where you can choose. So we think about it, they have some business requirements. Their current process is managed through emails, which a lot of the customers prefer. This company lacks a comprehensive customer view for hands-offs across the world. So if you think about it, a follow the sun approach, where if a customer is having a problem, America can pass it off to APAC, to Europe, and so forth. They have the need to adhere to local regulations and requirements. And they also had a recent security breach. So their existing systems, there's some exposure there, and they want to move quickly to a new solution. So in the chat, I'm going to ask you to respond to the question. All right. What type of project methodology do you recommend? And you can type 1 if you think we should go agile, and you can type 2 if you think we can go for waterfall. And I'll kind of look at the responses. We won't be explicitly scientific today. We'll just kind of go with the trend in here. Okay, everybody wants to go agile so far. 1 plus 2. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to take you down the path that you didn't choose. And just to give you an example, we'll get a mistake out of the way, and then we'll go back and look at agile. So waterfall. Well, guess what? Your project took 6 months just to gather and approve requirements. Meantime, the existing systems had to shut down because of the security breaches. So you ended up missing quarterly earnings, and you had to put large projects on hold, which meant then your project was terminated. So in this case, we're going to go back to business requirements and pick what everybody told me to do, which is agile. And yeah, I agree with that. That makes a lot of sense to me. There's a need to retire existing systems quickly. You need to focus on that minimum viable project functionality or product functionality for the initial groups that's going to roll onto your system. You're going to try and align to standard out-of-the-box functionality as much as you can. So good, our project has passed its first hurdle. And what's interesting is if we think about MVP, the pyramid that I put up is really important. When you're thinking about MVP, you want to take a slice of each of these, doing what's feasible, what's valuable to the organization, what they can use, but also an element of delightfulness, something that the team that's going to roll on to this new solution can use and be happy with, so that it builds momentum for the other pieces. Oftentimes, the mistake I see with MVPs, minimum viable projects or products, is you'll just try and take a slice across the bottom. Well, let's just do what's feasible. We'll just get something working that's out there, and that's a challenge, because now you don't fit into the other things. Well, you build a lot of stuff, but does the company care? And what you built, can somebody use it? And then more importantly, are people like, yeah, this is great. You know what? You solved this problem for me. Let's move into all these other challenges I have. So by focusing just on the bottom instead of a slice down the pyramid, you can also have some challenges. All right, so what comes next? Well, if we think about any projects as an architect, one of the things we try and do is we try and get a handle on the limits. Can we build a solution that is going to scale? So we're going to think about that. As an architect, I know that I'm working with about 2 million accounts and 4 million contacts. If I think about the initial group that's rolling on, I'm not going to take all 10,000 users. I'm going to take the ones that are on those systems that have to retire. There's about 50,000 cases a month. And because we're a transportation company, we have shipments. We have things moving back and forth all around the world. So we have about 5 shipments per customer per year. And then we need to integrate into the logistics system, and it supports REST. So now here's another challenge. What should we calculate? If you think it is A, then data and file storage, then put in a 1. If you think it is API consumption, let's go with a 2. Both. Hey, that wasn't one of my options. You can't be tricky. All right, so I see a 1. I see a few 2s. All right, so let's go to API calculation. I see some 2s there. So if we think about it, I'm going to do some back of the napkin type math, right? Going to get close. I'm not worried at this point in a project of getting it to the exact, tens of APIs that we're going to use, but we need to be close. So we're going to make some assumptions. 50,000 cases per day. Well, if we think about that, well, our work day is, people aren't going to be entering cases on the weekend, and I'll put weekend in quotes because we know around the world it could be different. Some cultures might start on a Sunday and have Friday and Saturday off. If you're looking at one time zone, you may have another. So we'll say maybe there's 20 or even 25 working days per month. So we get an average of under 3,000 cases per day. Seems pretty reasonable to me. If we think about how are we going to get that shipping information? Let's just say we make 10 calls into the logistics system for each case. So we have about 25,000 API calls. Shipments, well, again, each shipment, maybe it generates 4 calls when it's shipped, somewhere in transit, when it hits customs, and when it's delivered, something along those lines. So if we have 2 million shipments times 4 or 5 calls, then you know what? We probably are looking around 112,000. So all in all, that's about 140,000 API calls per day. Big number, but maybe not a problem if we look at the limits. So let's think about that. What are we going to get when we buy Salesforce licenses? Well, for each of the users that we buy, you're going to get 1,000 API calls. And our initial group is 1,000 users. So we have 1 million right now. So right now, it seems good. If we think about full volume, if we were ever to scale up to those 10,000, then we'd have over 10 million API calls. So in my mind, yeah, you know what? We're approved from an API calculation perspective. And for those that said both, you're right. We should go back. We should actually check out the data and file storage as well too. So I have another screen with a lot of math on it. This is it. No more math after this. But the idea is, what do we need to look at? Where do we need to put in assumptions? We know we have accounts and contacts. So we have 6 million of those. The good rule of thumb is about 2 KB per record, so 2 kilobytes. So it'd have 12 gigabytes there. Cases, well, we know we got 50,000 cases. Now the question is, how long should we plan for? How long is this system going to be running? Do we plan for it for a year, 10 years? We didn't really get any guidance in this scenario. So in those situations, I will usually look around 3 years, maybe 5 years, somewhere in that time frame. So for this example, let's take 3 years. So 50,000 cases a month over 3 years or 36 months. That's almost 2 million cases and 4 gigabytes of data. Well, we know those cases are going to come from email because we said email is really important. So if we have 1.8 million of those cases, each case generates 3 emails, then we have 11 gigs. The shipments, well, let's say each customer has 5 shipments. They're doing that over 3 years. Now we have 60 gigabytes. So if I add that all together, we have 87 gigabytes of files. So if we think about that, that's kind of just getting the what we think we're going to consume. We don't necessarily have an edition here, but I usually start with Enterprise Edition and then we'll go up from there. Given the volumes and the types of things we're using, I don't think Professional Edition would necessarily apply here. So for that initial group, again, let's go and look at what you get when you buy a license. You get 10 gigabytes plus 20 megabytes per user. So we have 30 gigabytes. Full org, if we think about it, well, if we go up to 10,000 users, then we'd have 210 gigabytes. So I think we're in the realm of reasonable. We said it'd be 87 gigabytes per year, and we're going to have 210. So that seems reasonable. We might have to watch how we scale up from 10 to 30, from the 1,000 to the 10,000, making sure because 30 is less than 87. So we do have to get all those users in to make sure. The other thing we should think about this time is files. And if you notice, based off of the same calculations, we either have 2 terabytes or 20 terabytes of files. In our particular scenario, the customer didn't say anything about files. So maybe we just back into that. If you were to put 1,000 kilobyte files, then you get 200 million. If you do 200, you get 100 million. And you can have that conversation of what do your files look like? All right, you think you're going to have more than 100 million files? No, we're probably not. So again, at this point in time, I think from a data and file storage perspective, we're approved. We've already did API calculations, so we can go to the next part of our story. So I saw there was a comment about emails. Let's talk about emails for a second. We know from the customer, it's really important. They want to be able to continue providing support to their businesses this way because that's the preferred channel. So how are we going to solve this? So we need to be able to email into the company any issues or questions or requests, and the support team will process and follow up with that case. And we may have some internal emails that forward into support and people need to work on. Now, before you answer, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at a couple of options. So we have the custom email handler or email to case. So if you're not familiar with it, if we want to do a custom email handler or an email service, what we can do is we can build some Apex. So I have an example email service right here. I should be able to edit this and show you what the code looks like. I can zoom in a little bit. So the first thing we have is we have the email service, the class that we're using, some settings. Are we accepting attachments? Do we need some security? Who are we accepting from? What to do if you get too many of these. And then the other piece to show you is the Apex class that goes with it. So here's the Apex class. My email handler, it's pretty simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at who it's coming from. So the from address in the email. I'm going to find the contact, and then I'm going to create a task for it. So if I were to jump over into my email, I have an email handler address. I'm going to say, I'm like, all right, let's create this new task for Apex hours. So I'll send that one in. What I should be able to do now is I should be able to find my contact. And I think I have me in here a couple of times, so I have to find the right one. Yep, this is the right one. And if I go in, now you can see I have tasks. So I have a task that was created, please follow up. So this came from an inbound email. I have a new task in here. So create this as a brand new task for Apex hours. So one way that we can communicate. The other way that we can communicate is with email to case. So if you're not familiar, email to case is an option that's out of the box with Salesforce, where you can enable it, and you can do it in one of two ways. You can do it On demand, which you don't have to install anything. And again, you just set up another email address. In this case, an email address that I'm going to send things from, and it'll automatically create a case for me. So again, we can jump back to email. So let's create an Apex Hours case because we are on an architect dimension. So if we come in to Salesforce and we go and look at cases, let's look at all open cases. And we'll pull the oldest here. So there's an Apex Hours case. So, pretty easy, a little bit of items that are set up, and now I can send emails and have it work. So now it's time for you to choose. How do we email? Custom email handler for 1 or email to case for 2? Oh, people have to think about this one. 1 and 2. Oh, it's pretty much split down the middle. All right, let's go to the custom email handler first. So the custom email handler, you know what? We want cases created. We created it, works great during development, but you know what? When you start going live, we're having some problems. Timeouts and locking are occurring frequently when people are trying to use the system. And the reason for that is our company, we're new to Salesforce. So we didn't really think about large data volumes and bulkification. So what ends up happening is all these emails just start sitting in the inbox, and customers aren't going supported, so they're not happy. So we need to go back to email functionality, and we need to take the other path. And that other path is email to case, because what it lets our company do is that we can reuse the existing email addresses we have, and we can bring those to Salesforce. So we'll automatically create cases. Our support agents, they can reply from Salesforce and leverage templates. So if you haven't seen the functionality, if I'm on a case here and I want to email, I can email from right within Salesforce. I can even jump down. I can use merge fields. I can use a template. So maybe I have a template that's, hey, this is how I want to send you a shipping claim form. So, hey, we're sorry you had a shipment issue. Please complete this claim form. We can send that particular piece out here. And I got a response. Thanks for submitting your case. So this case was created. And now, here's the shipping claim form that you can go and do it. And I just had some images because we're going to use some images in a little bit. So great functionality there. Helps us reach our MVP, right? We said we wanted to get to a lot of that functionality very quickly. So we went with that part. And guess what? Hey, support teams are happy. This functionality is great. We were able to retire those unsecure systems on schedule. And we've done such a good job that now we want to expand to the full organization. We're gonna put all of our users in, and we're gonna go worldwide with this solution. So we've been successful. Our journey is done. Met our project. Or have we? So let's keep reading. 9 months later, you have all 10,000 users live around the globe. And as you come into work one day, you notice you have 7 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 4 text messages. So something's on fire, right? Something's burning. We have a big, big problem. What's happened is since 1 a.m., cases aren't being created and emails cannot be received or sent. So my question is, now as an architect, I'm going to give you 2 options, but what went wrong? Did something happen with email related limits? Did we blow through our data file storage or APIs? Where do we need to dig in first to try and understand how to fix it? Everybody's going to email. Oh, see, I like that. I can say everybody's going to email, and I can influence a few twos. All right, I think email is the right path to go. So let's go on the email path. So I think there's some things to look at. On-demand email to case supports 1,000 users per license, up to 1 million emails per day. So we took a look at that. We're still under 1 million emails per day. It's not something that we calculated. There's no limit on outbound emails sent from the case or the contact. And if you're interested, these link right to the help articles, so you can go and look at the particular limits themselves to see what's going on. So it was a good place to start, but not where our problem is. So we need to keep looking, but we need to hurry because the business is on fire. So let's go back to the other one. It wasn't email related limits. Let's look at the data storage. Well, if we come in, we look at data storage, it's only 60% used. Email message is the top object, case is next. File storage, well, we're only 35% used, but we do notice, content bodies reports 30 million objects. So if you haven't ever looked, if you come into Salesforce, right, you have your data storage versus what's used. You have your file storage. You can see I'm almost out of files in this org. Here's the different objects. And then down here, current file storage, you have knowledge, attachments, content bodies that refers to Salesforce files. And the API limits, we look at those. Ranges are between 10 to 15% used over 24 hours. So that doesn't seem like our problem. But I'll tell you what, you're getting close. So we need to keep digging. So this is a case where it's something else. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at Salesforce CRM content limits. Oh, no, I don't want to give you the answer here. So let's open this one, Salesforce CRM content limits. I don't have it open, it's 1 second. So when we're dealing with files, this information is going to apply. So you can deliver 50,000 files, you have 25K, maximum number of libraries, 2,000. Oh, maximum number of files, 30 million. So there we go. Listen to that. We had 30 million content bodies before. So we've hit it. Our content bodies are over 30 million, and we have a limit of how many files we can have at one time of 30 million. Even though we had terabytes of storage, once you hit that number 30 million, it's going to stop you. So my question is, what do we do? Do we cry, and then maybe empty the recycle bin? Do we hope this is a soft limit? How do we get out of this? Because we're right up against something. External solution for document storage. I like it, but that, think about it. Business is down. Nobody's sending emails. How fast can we implement an external solution? Yeah, we could back up email attachments, but again, longer term solutions when the world's on fire, what are we going to do? So I'm going to start. I'm going to cry. I mean, look, get it out of your system. We've all been there, right? There's things that you miss. There's mistakes that is made. Being an architect, it's a journey. There's definitely peaks and there can be valleys as well. So the first thing I would do is I would definitely find some things that I can remove. Get emails out, get cases, get files. Just trying to buy myself time, buy myself a couple of hours, right? Something where you can get business flowing again, but then we need to get help from Salesforce. So this is where we can talk about soft versus hard limits. So there's some Salesforce limits, non-negotiable. Apex CPU time, not going to change it. You have that set, you get 10 seconds, shared across everything, that's it. You go 10.1, your process is going to be stopped. Other things, they can be adjusted. Data storage, API calls, you can purchase more of those things. And sometimes Salesforce is willing to grant you a courtesy relief or a temporary adjustment to it. So we're gonna fall on the mercy of Salesforce and say, please adjust this for us. Help us out of this, move us from 30 million to something else. And guess what? They agree because they want you to be successful as a customer and say, yeah, we'll give you 50 billion, but you have to have a plan because you can't just keep going and growing this because eventually you're going to hit a point where it's a hard limit and you can't go any faster. So you're going to have a resolution for it. So this is where now we should do a little bit of inspection. Like, what did we miss? Well, we calculated 100 to 200 million files, right? Based off of that storage size, but we missed the 30 million limit. So we said you could put in all these files, not knowing that there was a files content limit. What happens with email to case is each email or attachment, it's stored as a file. So the actual number of files we have, it's much larger because the size is really small. So think about like every time somebody puts a logo, a signature, a social icon, hey, tweet me, LinkedIn, Facebook, great. All those things get stored as files. When you start replying to emails and you have your own company signatures, all those things are stored. The other thing that happens, there's not built-in intelligence around these files. If I send my company logo 20 times, I have 20 files of that. If each of my 10,000 sales reps send the company logo 20 times, you do the math, right? So it keeps increasing that way. So if we were to go back to this case in Salesforce, if we look at it, let's see, help with shipment. If I go to related, you can see all these emails. You can see the activity history, case history, and right here, all the attachments. This is a place that's a little bit weird. It's called attachments, but it could either be old attachments or it could be new files. In my case, it's new files. Look at this. You can see, the same file, who, Acme, but it's stored as each separate image. So now we're going to start moving into that solutioning and that problem solving mode as an architect. All right, we got to do something about this data. We can't keep letting it grow. How are we going to solve this? What solution? Do you want to configure and build, think about some of the different things we have in Salesforce that we could use or external solutions, or do we want to buy? What solution? How are we going to archive data? That's what we want. How should we go about doing it? Nobody wants to build it. Hey, you know what? I don't blame you. I definitely don't blame you when it comes to thinking about building. There's some things that you could do. And I know everybody's saying too, but I think it's an important point to draw out that you could look at things like Privacy Center, which it didn't exist at the time of this project, so we weren't going to do that. You could put it in your own big object, but what happens when the schema changes? What happens? How do you handle binary content? I see Heroku in there, same thing. This is files. We need to remove binary information, not just records. How's Heroku as a database solve me being able to see and access files? And if I need to bring something back, how do I restore from some of those? So yeah, I think this is a place where you go looking for an archive solution, one that's built to securely archive large data, support enterprise object model, and have files. So it's something from an Otis Eva perspective where I work, we have. We're not the only solution out there, so you can go wherever you see is necessary. And then you need to figure out what to archive. Determine criteria that says this information, we don't need it in Salesforce. Maybe it's cases that were closed 3 months ago of a certain type and they have no open subcases, things along those lines. You're going to start with case and you're going to pull out that information and the files that go with it. So when we think about it, all right, get these cases, 3 months, certain case type, no open subcases. How do we want to mark them? How do we want to go through and figure out a way to get this out? And we have two options. You can do something like use a checkbox or a formula field with a date. So we could say, hey, archive this record, check, or once this case has been open, past 3 months, there's a formula that says it. Or do we want to use a pick list or text field on it to say this should be archived? So one or two. All right, I'm seeing a lot of one. So I'm going to go with the one solution. So the archive this record, true, false, I think is really, really easy to understand. Makes a lot of sense to me. So let's jump into Salesforce. I have developer console here. And what I can do is I can write a new query that's select ID. And you know what? I forget what my archive field is. Let's just open up the case. Nope, I need to refresh, sorry. So I can pull my case ID and I can pull my archive. So let's just query those. Okay, that seems reasonable, 44 cases. I can do where archive _c equals true. Now, one of the things I want to call out that you can use inside a developer console, you can use through APIs, is the idea of a query plan, where you can see what's going on with the query that you're writing. Now, we used a checkbox, and even though I only have one record checked as true, my query is doing a table scan. It's looking at everything. So when I need to go across 20, 30 million records, this SOQL statement is probably going to time out. And the reason for that is checkboxes, they're not indexed by Salesforce, and you can't index them. So it's not going to use an index. We could do formula logic. We could say, hey, if this case is greater than 3 months, today is greater than 3 months from the date that the case was closed, let's archive it. Well, again, that formula, if you're going to use something like today in it, it becomes non-deterministic, which means even though you can put an index on it, that index isn't going to be used. So in all these examples, if we use a checkbox or a formula field, our SOQL turns into full table scans and ends up timing out. So this is where you can use a pick list or a text value. You can have a pick list to say archive. And if you have archive, then you want to take it out. You could also use a text field. So you could write in the word archive. That's what I'm going to do in this example. I have a text box in here that is called archive type. And the reason I did that is I can make this an external ID. When I went and created this field, one of the options down here is make it as an external ID. And if you do that, then the field is indexed for you. So you don't have to go and contact Salesforce support and get a custom index and all those things built. So sometimes it's easier to take that path. So good. Now, as somebody mentioned before, I need a job to mark for number 2, right? So I have a text, I have a blank value, but I have to populate it. I have to get it in there in a way that can say, these are the cases we need to archive. So if we think about how we go through and update things automatically or multiple records at time, I think 2 items come into mind. So how do we upgrade? Oh, you're already answering. How do we update? Either batch apex or trigger on a case. Oh, nobody likes triggers. I love it. All right, so batch apex, that's the way I would go. In batch apex, what we can do, we can write a class that takes in criteria and then updates the cases. It's going to look at the case and it's going to say, all right, if it's older than 3 months of this type and no open subcases, we're going to put the value of archive in that text field. We can set that batch to execute on a regular basis, and we do. But what happens is, when I run that, it's taking 8 hours to update 100,000 cases. We just want to mark 100,000 cases and say archive, updating one field in it. What's going on? What's the performance issue? Is it, well, I'm an architect, I'm not really that good at code? Or do you think maybe automations are interfering here? What should we go investigate next to figure out that performance? This is the best answer. Nobody thinks I'm bad at coding. I have you all fooled. That's great. All right, I agree with you. I agree that if we move forward, what we're going to look at is what's going on in this particular org. And when we start looking, we can only find one trigger. Great, they're following a one trigger pattern. But as we dig into that trigger, it's doing 50 blocks of logic. What does that mean? It's calculating invoices, it's rolling up values, it's manipulating other pieces of data. It's doing it both before and after. So there's 50 things that execute. But that's not it, because we can put click automation inside of our org. So we find 15 process builders, 2 flows, 7 workflow rules, assignment rules, escalation criteria. So all of this is making our updates go slower. So the way we can think about it is, all right, how are we going to do that? We need a bypass. We need a way that for our user, we can skip these automations. And most people are familiar with it from a trigger perspective, putting in a trigger handler and having custom metadata or another mechanism to turn off that trigger. maybe not as familiar from a process automation perspective, clicks, setting a flag on the user that says skip workflow rules or skip process builders, and then checking that and Xing immediately. So in putting that in place, now we've got the time down to an hour. So good. We have our cases marked. They're ready for export. Now we need to get the data. So we're going to query cases where the flag equals archive. We're going to pull out 100,000 records at a time. We know that case is only part of the picture. If we delete the case, it's not going to necessarily take other things that we need. So we're going to get the email message. So we query the email message where the parent flag equals archive. So now we have emails, cases, and we need to get the related files. If you're not familiar with files, here's the object model. There's 3 things that we can think about. There's content document. That's like the header information. Hey, this is a file. The name is image. It's of a JPEG. Then you have the content version. Hey, this is the binary information of the file. You can have multiple versions of those things. And then we need to query it out. So what do I go for? Do I go for content document or version or something else? And I think there's a few answers in there. CMS content. Okay. So if we start with content and document, holds the header information, version has the binaries, but guess what? Neither of these directly link back to the case or the email. So that's where we have to find the missing link, which is called content document link. And this is what will take you from Salesforce right back to the content itself. So if we think about it, let's query that out. Let's take a look at it, and we can query it from developer console here. And I have an example of content document link. So let's just grab all the content document links that are out there. So right away, what's interesting about this is you can't just query it. You can't go in and say, let me see all my content document links. There's a restriction. Content document link, you have to filter by a single ID, either in content document link or linked entity. So content document points back to the file, linked entity points to where it's related. So you always have to come in and do something like this. And I can see, all right, I have these documents. They go back to 005. So that's what? That's a case. Its shared type is inferred, and all users have access to it. So with this restriction, we need to figure out, how do we filter on that? So if we think about it, well, maybe I can use the way from content to get the content document link and then get my version. Like I'm gonna do some sockle ninjery here to get there. So what we can look at is, all right, I want to get everything in this content document link where this, in this content document where the content document link came from the email. So this would be this one. So let's get from content document link all of this particular information. Well, in this case, I don't have anything. Well, let me write a different query. Let me write one where I go right after content document link. So in this case, I'm going to just say select content doc. Whoops, I can't type today. So if we were to just say, let's get the content document where the IDs are in content document link, you end up with another error. And I have it here where content document link, it can't be a semi-join inner select. So what does that mean? So you can't say something like, well, here's all the content document links that respond to this particular case or this particular email message now get the content documents. So you can't really put these things together in a subquery and get it out. You have to essentially be able to list things out. So getting files from Salesforce is hard. That typical SOQL approach and relationships that we use don't work. We can't string things together. We can't use a where clause. We need to figure out, how are we going to identify these are the content files that we need to get out. So in my mind, I'm going to create a table, right? I'm going to put a table in there and I'm going to say, all right, these are the records from Salesforce that I want to pull out from a files perspective. So when we're building this table, let me show you what it looks like first before you answer. If I come in here and I go to my object manager, I have this archive record table, and it's just going to hold one record that represents each file that we should remove from the system. So in building this, I need to put on some fields. And when it comes to the field that points to the file, what type should it be? Should it be a lookup to that file, or should it be a string that represents it? So a couple votes for string. Okay, so let's go in and let's make it a string. So I've built out my record ID string field here. So I have this particular item ready to go. So what we can do, let's go ahead and query it. So if we go back to dev console, so we're going to take from content document where the ID is in, well, let's just make sure I have this right first. So we're going to take from content document where the ID is in select record ID from archive. Oh boy, I forgot my table name. Archive record C. Interesting. Semi-join subselects can only query ID fields. So we made it a string, but we can't actually use it this way in a SOQL statement because we can't select a different string data type out. All right, so let's go from the slides here. So the string, easy for us to create, querying it, except you're blocked. So maybe we should try that other option, right? Let's go back. Let's go back and do a lookup. So let's go to the fields. Let's do a new field. I'm going to add it as a lookup. And we will go down to the Fs. Oh, that's right. It's called content document. Let's go to the Cs. Guess what? It's not there. You can't use content document or files as a lookup. Maybe we can get to the email message. No, I can't use email message. So again, another roadblock here. We tried both methods. And so guess what? Getting files is really hard because we can't do it with SOQL. We weren't able to put lookups or strings on there. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to mix in some code. So we're going to have some Apex where we can generate or an external solution that generates a list of IDs and queries off that IDs. So what we end up with is something that looked like the example I had here, which is like this, where we have to either generate a list of content document links and use it with content document, or go and use a where clause that has the files that we specifically want to get. So we're going to get it. Okay, fine. Figured out a way. It was hard. Now we have to get the files actually out. So what API do we want to use? Do we want to use REST, or do we want to use bulk or bulk2 to get out these millions of files that we need to deal with? Yeah, bring on the bulk. We got big data. So let's go here. There's no way my Workbench session is still connected. So let's relog in. And what I can do, I can go to jobs, query. I'm going to show you bulk too, just because it's easier to demonstrate. So let's do a post. We're going to do a query operation, and we're going to get information from content version. So let me just take this one off just to show you. This is the content version information, right? When we put on this one extra field, version data, that's where it stores the actual binary information. So good. I'm going to submit, I'm going to query this. I'm going to get everything out. Ooh, we have an API error. Blob field not supported in bulk v2. And this is true of bulk as well. So this version data, it's a blob binary large object block. You can't get that out with bulk. You are stuck here, and you have to go with REST. So it seems like the obvious choice. You can load it, but you can't query it back out. So now we need to submit SOCL requests via REST to access the objects to pull it out. We need to think about things like the file size, like, well, how big is the file? Did we fail somewhere in transit? Do we need to retry? But we get through it. Like, okay, worked hard. Now we have a copy of the files. We got it out. Now it's time to delete. We need to remove this information from Salesforce. So when it comes to deletes, we can do a couple of things. We can delete the case, and we know that it will cascade delete. So the case will delete things like a case comment because it's master detail. So do we want to delete that way, or do we want to start and do we want to delete everything individually? Like, we're going to delete the case, we're going to delete the email message, we're going to delete the content, and so forth. What's the right way to remove this information from Salesforce? Evenly split so far. Not sure. That's probably the honest answer out there, right? You've totally confused me with all these things. I'm seeing a few ways. I think there's maybe one or two more ones. So let's start with that. All right, I'm gonna delete it. I'm gonna just do it in Dev Console because it's a little bit easy to show. So in this example, let's start with one particular case. So here's a case. Here is the content document link that corresponds with that case. And now here is the content that corresponds with it. All right, so if I follow what everybody told me to do, I'm going to come into this case and I'm just going to delete it. So let's go ahead, delete, refresh the grid. Good, it's gone. Let's go and let's look at content document link. Let's refresh this. Good, it's gone. Let's go to content, refresh it, and we're good to go. Wait, what happened here? Didn't disappear. So the content is still there. Well, what happens when you delete? We remove the email message. We remove content document link, but the content remains. Why? What did we miss? Well, what we need to look at is we need to look at content document link in a little bit different way. So let's go back and let's look at content document link. And let's just take one of the files. All right, so if we look at content document link, and instead of looking by the linked entity, let's look where the content document ID equals a value. Ooh, so we still have a content document link here. What happens is when you upload a file, two things occur on that record. One, it gets tagged to that record, but then it also gets this inferred share to all users. So actually two content document links get created when you upload that file. When we delete the case, it cascades and deletes the content document link that refers to the record itself, but it doesn't touch this other record because this one is the file going not to the case, but going to all users. So this is I think this is a group. Case starts with 500, 005 is a group. So because of the way Salesforce deletes it, the file itself gets preserved. So instead, we need to delete the content document as well. So we can delete the case and it'll cascade, and then we go to the content document and it cascades. So good example here. You can usually do it in parallel with the bulk API. You can hard delete if you want for performance reasons. So those things will help remove it. Generally, there's not a lot of locking contention that's going on there. So good. One of the things, we've got it out, got the files, deleted the cases, deleted the files. So with all of our work to archive, we're in good shape. We're back under the limit, and the system is back up and running. So we're successful. We're great. What we can do is we can look at that content limits document one more time, because there's something else that we kind of read over that may come back to cause a problem for us in the future. So we took care of the 30 million, so we should be good, right? Well, look at the line underneath. Maximum number of files and versions in a 24-hour period, 200,000. So what does that mean? Well, that means if you create more than 200,000 records, 200,000 files in 24 hours, you're going to hit this limit and be blocked again. So even though we're fixing the back end and getting under the 30 million, once your volume increases, you could end up with hitting this. Now, it is adjustable, so you have a little bit of leeway here, but again, it's probably not going to be, there's going to be a maximum somewhere, and it may be too high. So there's always another chapter as an architect where you can think about this, like, okay, we're going to have another challenge. So start thinking about your volumes and your growth and where you're going to hit that, and being able to take a plan in advance. So questions. Let me see what's in here. Why is a file shared to all users by default? If you look at files, files are weird. I think we figured that out in today's discussion, but files originally started with Chatter. It was Chatter files before it moved into, hey, we're going to use files for everything. So there was an element of how you share files, and whether it is in your private library, whether it's public, whether people can access it. So there's ways that it will look at, do I follow the library and the private set of restrictions, or do I follow it based off of record access? I believe we can look at it. If we go to content document link, oops. When we look at the share types, so inferred by all users doesn't mean it's applicable. Every user can use it. It means the user's permission is determined by the related record. So when it's a library, it's based off the library. But if it's a file on a record, then it's going to say, all right, if you can see that record, then you can see the file. That's why it gets created, that inferred by default. Let's see. Those 30 millions are also applicable to URL. I assume you're meaning like files connect. I believe so, because I think files connect still creates content document records so that you know where to get to it. But don't take that one to the bank. Sometimes there's things architects will say, I'm not quite sure, but if that's the way it works, I would see it. If you go into content external files and it's not creating any records, then you'd have a different set of limits to apply. So I'll give you, I think so, but verify. If we use files for storing managed package logs with 200K, it will hit the limit. What's the alternative approach? That's a tough one. I'd have to think about that for a moment. Big object, yeah, you could do it in big objects, but you're going to have 1 million record limit in the org before you fill up that. So I would think it's looking and seeing how much you have room for. Do you need to create separate files? Can you create the same file, or can you append to the file? Can you write to that file for a while? Maybe it's external too. Maybe it's a place where you don't need to do it inside of Salesforce if you're going to be logging that much information. I mean, that's a lot of files to generate in a day from I don't know what your managed package does, but for a managed package, it's pretty easy to hit if you think about, hey, I get 100,000 emails a day and each of them has 2 logos and an attachment. Well, now you're already at 300,000. We hit the same concept when we build a flow, which has content, I guess. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have the same challenges with access, the way that you get to files. It's not unique to working with the APIs. It's definitely true of the platform in itself. Any other questions? Thank you for the feedback about the session. Enhanced Notes also creates contents document. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. All right. Maybe if Amit, if you're not in the middle of changing a diaper, you want to wrap us up and take us out?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl, for such a great session and lots of good information. I hope everyone like it. And the recording of the session will be available on the Epic Hour YouTube channel very soon. And thank you, Carl, for such a great session. Lots of new learning. Personally, I learned a lot in this session.
Well, thank you. My pleasure to present today.
And thank you everyone for the joining. And don't forget to join our next session. We have 4 architects joining in the next session. If you have any question regarding how to prepare or anything, feel free to join our next session, and it will be great opportunity to ask anything with our architects. See you in the next session.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carls.